Welcome to the Startup Junkies Podcast. My name is Davis McEntire. These are the stories of people who are afflicted to innovate and create the next great products and services that change lives. In this week's episode, we are recapping the best podcasts of 2021. You'll hear bits and pieces of your favorite episodes over the year. We are glad you are listening in. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check out each of 2021's best podcasts linked below. Let's get into it. And starting off with our number 5 slot, we have episode 267, Data on Deck with TJ Sangam of Supply Pike. In this episode, Caleb Talley and Jeff Amerine sit down with TJ, CEO and co-founder of Supply Pike, a company that seeks to help suppliers focus on growing their business by building and informing collaborative products through machine learning and artificial intelligence. The topics in this episode circled as supply chain disruptions, wild west of NFTs and cryptocurrency, to a future of deep fake and AI. So buckle up and you'll find out why this podcast slides in at the number 5 spot on our list of top listened to episodes of 2021.
So TJ is the CEO of Supply Pike. So tell us about Supply Pike.
Yeah, so Supply Pike is a software company. We build B2B SaaS products targeting suppliers. So this is anybody who sells into a Target or a Walmart or Amazon. So those are our customers. So like the problem that we solve is that essentially retailers buy the products from these suppliers wholesale, and then they sell it back to the customers, which is you and me. When we go to Walmart, buy these products, go to Amazon and buy these products. But for the retailers to sell the products to us and make sure there's enough products on the shelf, they need to make sure that there's enough product in their warehouses to meet the demand. So the retailers put a lot of constraints on the suppliers to make sure that the suppliers are sending them enough product. And oftentimes these constraints are really strict and severe, and suppliers are not able to meet these constraints. So they get hit with like a ton of fines, like up to like 20% of their revenue. So what Supply Pike does is we come in, we help them understand where they're losing money, like identify. A lot of times suppliers don't even know that they're hemorrhaging tons of money. So we help identify that, and then we help either recover some of those fines. Sometimes those fines are invalid because of supply chain errors. And sometimes those fines are valid. And if those fines are valid, which means that the supplier didn't meet their side of the obligation to the retailer, we help them understand why they didn't and try to give them like tools to fix their supply chain so they can be more compliant. So at a 50,000 foot view, that's kind of what we do. But does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But give us this is the part where we do kind of the Wolverine Marvel origin story.
Okay.
Wind it back before that. What led you to Supply Pike? Give us a little bit of your history before you got to Supply Pike.
A little bit of history before I got to Supply Pike.
The stuff that you can disclose.
Okay.
I know witness protection program sometimes doesn't allow it, but
yeah. So it started like a decade ago. It started like 10 years ago when I first met Dan. Dan hired me to help lead his R&D division at K-Stack. So Dan and I were building a lot of software, and first of all, internally to help K-Stack to make them more efficient. So we built a TMS to manage all their freight. We built like the scheduling algorithms to sort of route the trucks between the different warehouse campuses. We built algorithms to like pack the trucks. And then we started slowly building stuff that was not necessarily consumed by K-Stack, but was targeted towards the CPGs themselves.
Right.
So we started experimenting, doing a lot of trial and error stuff, and eventually, some of those products had product market fit, got some traction. So when K-Stack was acquired by Hub Group for $250 million a few years ago, we got spun out from them to be a separate company, and that's kind of how we started. So now we exist as a fully standalone company, fully arm's length from K-Stack.
Venture backed, right?
Venture backed.
Yeah.
We raised 15 million Series A when we got spun out. So that's kind of like the quick story of how we came to be.
And that brings us to the number 4 spot. We have episode 262, Shifting the Dollar to NWA Food and Beverage with Kim Bearden of Curate. Curate creates local and regional value chains through entrepreneurship education, access to new market opportunities, and public-private partnership. This company has become a tested model for supply and demand matchmaking, connecting big and small business supply chains to economic development ecosystems that have been fragmented for too long. In this episode, Jeff, Caleb, and I sit down with Kim to discuss a wide range of topics, whether it's making a killer Bloody Mary, almost being in the FBI, running a grocery store, to having a massive heart for small businesses. You'll see why this podcast rolls in at the number 4 slot for our top episodes of 2021.
Give us the origin story for yourself and Curate.
Okay, so I'm going to take us back to the financial collapse of 2009.
Never heard of it.
Yes. And so at the time, I went to American University. I studied marketing and Spanish. And my intention was that I wanted to work in the arts industry. I had worked for different nonprofit art galleries and the American Film Institute. My mind has always thought about what's the high-level message that an art exhibit, for example, wants to communicate down to the font on the wall. What's that whole user experience look like? Perhaps that is why I've called this business Curate, a little foreshadowing here, because I wanted to be a museum curator. So unfortunately, in said financial collapse, not a lot of jobs in the arts industry. And so I had put myself through school hostessing parties for upper Northwest DC families. I'd take coats, make drinks, etc. And at one of these soirees, there was a gentleman there that was like, "Who are you?" I'm like, what are you doing here? I think it was like a baby shower. What are you doing at this intimate affair? And I had said who I was, and he was like, "Well, I run the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration. We're hiring. If you ever need a job, look at our job site." I was like, "Okay, whatever. This is not the career path I had intended." And from that moment, I then had my resume on the American University career web, and the FBI found my resume. And they called me in for an interview, and I was like, again, there aren't a lot of jobs out there. What the hell? I could be Jennifer Gardner in Alias. Why not? And so
One of my favorite characters.
And so I, went for the interview, and I was asked very vague questions like, "Tell us a problem you had." And I was like, what do I tell them? And anyways, I then got a conditional offer, and I started that very long process. But my loans are kicking in, so I thought I need a job in the meantime. And again, like I said, it's 2009, not a lot out there. So I go and work for the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration. And so I started doing manager's licenses, solicitor's licenses, temp permits for weddings and events, imports of alcohol into the district. And I was meeting all these bar and restaurant owners who would come to me and be like, "Finally, someone who knows how to use a computer." And I was like, what is going on here? And I was hearing all this rhetoric of, small business, the backbone of the American economy. And I was like, why is it so hard for people to start and run businesses? I don't understand. So then I started learning more and more about what does it take to start and run a small business, specifically food and beverage in the district. And then I just learned more about the industry that way. And then Whole Foods found me in that process. And they had asked me to apply for their Northern Virginia store that had been open about 6 years. They hadn't seen a lot of customer count increase or basket size increase. And they said, you should apply for this job. At that time, Whole Foods was known for doing a lot of promotion from within, not having someone from the outside. And I was in my early 20s, so all around I was just like, what's going on? Okay, again, what the hell? Let me give it a try. And so I had that interview. It was actually even more intense than a lot of FBI interviews I had. It was really, really strict. And I got the job. And it was this first really divergent path for me between, do I stick on the route that my baby boomer parents may have decided, government stability, etc., again, financial collapse, or do I choose my values? do I choose this thing that is for some reason calling to me to go work in a grocery store? And that's ultimately
But a really cool grocery store.
but not even like what it is today, right?
Yeah.
It was still in this, in the beginning of the massive growth stage.
Yeah.
And so I chose to work for Whole Foods, and literally 4 days later, I was called and was like, you're cleared. When can you start? And I was like, oh, I'm going to work in the private sector. And they were like, oh, like name management consulting agency, Deloitte. And I was like, nope, a grocery store. And so then I worked for Whole Foods. I ended up opening a store from scratch in downtown DC. They put me on the track to then be a store team lead and run a Whole Foods. I had one of these other moments of like, is this what I want to do with my life? Now it's 2013, rise of Instagram and Twitter. I got really interested in how online behavior affects offline purchasing. And I went back to school at Georgetown for digital media management and analytics to try and understand that question even more. How do these two things relate? And that pushed me into the food tech world. And the last job I held before starting Curate, this business was based in Brooklyn, but I still lived in DC, and I launched new markets for them. So I went to Chicago, Austin, Seattle, New York, and their product was putting chefs in people's homes. So you would go on this site and say, I'm having a dinner party for 10 people. My budget's $50 a person. Make me an offer. And chefs would bid on you.
We've seen this movie, and we know that you're actually still an undercover agent for the FBI.
Yeah.
It was a nice try.
Yes. Lots of people think this, actually. And just to tell you about that, the finale here is that company raised $20 million. I was reporting to the C-suite, and because I was launching new markets, kept asking, what's the growth plan here? I need to know. And I felt at the time treated like put baby in the corner. Like, you don't know, little girl. And I was like, actually, I think I do know, and I'm confused as to how you're going to pay this back plus returns or have an acquisition strategy. I'd like some clarity. And that planted this seed, in me, this like fire in my belly of, I'd like to work with people that, I don't know, care about stable cash flow, who actually build businesses that are of and from their communities. And that was really what, again, lit my fire to start Curate.
Launched you back towards helping small business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to our number 3 spot. We have episode 258, Buying the Farm with Carter Malloy and Michael Eisman of Acre Trader. Acre Trader is an investment company whose goal is to democratize the asset of farmland. Jeff, Caleb, and I sit down with the guys at Acre Trader and discuss the rising global population and therefore the food demand. We also talk about diversifying your investment portfolio, long-term returns, and how this company is not only leveling up an asset acquisition, but creating a stellar company culture. As you can see, this is why it rolls in at our number 3 spot. Let's hear a little bit about it.
Well, give us the update, though. Give us for those listeners that aren't already, on the platform buying and selling farmland for you guys. Give us the 30-second update on what Acre Trader does and the latest news. I mean, it's exciting times for you guys.
Michael's going to tell you what we do, and I'm going to tell you the update.
Okay, so
15 seconds.
15 seconds. Farmland has been a pretty incredible asset class and has not been very correlated with the stock market, but it's very difficult to buy and transact and manage and even source or find deals. And so most investors have not had access to the asset class at all. And so Acre Trader identifies good opportunities to invest in farmland, and then you can buy shares of each farm through our platform. Typically minimums are in the $15,000 to $30,000 range rather than buying $1 million farm in the middle of Illinois. And then we handle all of the management, the administration to make a completely passive investment. And you'd have typically annual distributions with your portion of the income, usually from a farmer renting out the land. And farmland has appreciated very well over time because there's less and less of it and more mouths to feed. And so eventually when the farm is sold, you would have your portion of the initial investment plus appreciation returned. And that's kind of the life cycle of a deal.
Michael, that is like the best elevator pitch I've ever heard you do.
I learned from learned from the man.
That was great. Really good.
Yeah, you I think taught me how to do elevator pitches senior year of college. Like, back.
You've gotten even better. Okay, world class. No, that was really good. Easy to understand. So give us the update, Carl.
The update is we're growing like crazy and we're having the best time of our careers. So today we are.
No offense, Jeff. No.
Steal one of my best guys and rub it in. It's like, so glad I don't work for that schluck.
Michael has been highly successful in building and running a team of amazing people within the investor relations function of our platform. But on a wider note, we are approaching 40 people. So
Wow.
been 20 of those having been hired this year. That's the thing. I'm going to go on a quick tangent and talk about the update more, but that's the thing that we care about the most as a business is making sure we hire incredible people. So we hire very slowly, we fire fast as well in order to maintain talent density and to have really great people that we're proud to work with every day. And as a result, we end up having a great product. We have really great investments to come through and ultimately really great outcomes for those that we work with. So we're really proud of the people that we work with, and that's probably the most important or the most fun part of the update.
Yeah.
Beyond that, we've done well over $100 million of deals.
Wow.
We are in a dozen states. Our investors through our platform, which are measured in the thousands at this point, or tens of thousands of folks have signed up with us. They're invested across a dozen different U.S. states. And so, yeah, it's been an absolutely wild time since you and I last sat down on microphones. And there was one test farm I don't believe we had launched or we had just launched.
You're just getting ready to, right?
This would have been correct. That would have been early 2019.
And that brings us to our number 2 spot, one of our highest viewed podcasts on our YouTube channel. We have episode 263, Building Sustainable Talent with Tim Miller of Central Standard. In this episode, Jeff, Caleb, and I talk with Tim about business growth outpacing talent, culture's influence on customer loyalty, the war on talent, and the flaws in the recruiting agencies who pull from international pools, and what makes Central Standard different. So, let's dive into it.
So skip ahead. My first job out of college, I went to work for EDS and had to do. I went there because I wanted to do their systems engineering.
Was that when Ross Perot was still
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And I wanted to do their SED program, which is really famous, Systems Engineer Development. And they were, like IBM and others that back in the day, they were known for training. It's a place where you could go to work and get really good training. What I didn't know was that they gave you a little training, but they made you be an analyst because they were like, you can't write code on the Arkansas Medicare account if you don't understand Medicare. Right?
Yeah.
And so after about a year and a half of learning everything about long-term care and everything else and billing codes, I finally got to complete that program and got out of there. Actually, I had to threaten to quit. It was like the Army. They owned me for so many more years, and I was like, if you don't let me go to Plano, I'm quitting. So I wrangled myself down to Plano, and that's where I kind of started, I guess, my professional sort of real job world. It was good. It was good training. Just skipping ahead, what I was doing at EDS was very new and kind of cutting edge, and IBM wanted to do the same thing. And literally, I remember just getting a call from this guy at IBM and said, "Are you this same guy that's doing this?" And he's like, "Quit. Tell him you're leaving." Anyway, long story short is, I went to New York and started basically the same thing I was doing for EDS, but IBM wanted to do it.
Were you in White Plains?
No, I was in Manhattan, but great experience there. And then I guess my first experience with entrepreneurism was my brother had started a medical supply business, and I could tell he was really onto something. He you kind of know when something's starting to scale, and went to work with him, and we sold his business, and that's when I finally had a chance to sit back and see what I wanted to do. And at the time, my dad had just gotten a mobile phone, and everybody's texting, and I was just like, I gotta do something with this text messaging. So we sat around for about a year trying to figure out what that would be. This is 2006. And then early 2007, T-Mobile finally, the first carrier to finally publish the rules of what you could and couldn't do over the network. Until that time, everyone you asked, it was a different story. Can you do this? No. Yes. I mean, everybody had a different opinion.
Right.
But there was no rules until T-Mobile issued their playbook for commercial text messaging. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going with that. If that says you can do it, we're building a business around that. So we built some software that managed short codes, those 5-digit codes that you all see on infomercials and every call to action, billboards, radio, TV. And our software controls what happens, so from everything from opting someone in to those disclosures, polls, contests, surveys. We got into multimedia messaging, so we were pretty good at some of the more sexy things like, personalized images and being able to, give every dynamic coupon code. It's the idea I could send everybody a different message. Well, everybody would the same blast, right? But your coupon code would look different. You change your barcode. That's pretty. When we were doing it, no one else was doing it.
Absolutely.
So it was pretty out there. And there were some other neat things on our platform, but in general, there was a lot of people doing that. It was a pretty competitive space. Started trying to do small business. We thought that was kind of, when you're an unfunded startup in Arkansas, you're looking for anything you can scale. So
right.
Bars, restaurants.
Trying to sell to anybody.
Anybody, right?
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many meals my wife ruined by trying to, sell to the proprietor of the place that we were eating and drinking. And I was like, honey, I don't want. Anyway, I had to. Eventually, we realized that scaling that sort of, let's call it $100 a month type of product. But we had some success. We had a nice little rep model, and let's say it probably could have worked, but. The features and functions we were building were way beyond that audience. Like what they needed to do, I could have built the first 3 months and just called it a product.
Sure.
And I'm doing these things that really only appeal to really big brands. That
it was true MarTech before anybody called it MarTech.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just the kind of stuff though that your small business would never know how to harness and never could. And so we just kind of abandoned that and really just started going the deep end of the pool, like just calling on the biggest, and got lucky here and there. By the time we sold Sumotex, we were doing everything for Starbucks and Southwest Airlines, and Ace Budget Group, and I could go down the line. But yeah, it started that way.
And that brings us to our number one spot, ladies and gentlemen. It is our number one listened to and number one most downloaded podcast of 2021. Our first in-person podcast back as well. Post-pandemic, we have episode 248, an overnight success story, 6 years in the making, with Vance and Spencer of Linnaeus Medical. In this episode, Jeff and Caleb sit down with Vance Clement, CEO, and Spencer Jones, CTO and founder of Linnaeus Medical. With the company being right on the heels of FDA approval for their flagship device, SafeBreak Vascular, you will not want to miss this episode. We cover all things balancing expectations to responding to failure and navigating next after success. Let's get into it.
And some of that, they, as I recall, I know you're glad and you've gotten good reviews and good approvals recently, but some of it was they changed you from being able to use a predicate, which would have been ostensibly a quicker device, to being de novo, right? You had to do there was a little more rigor involved in the process.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So the 510K process is the regulatory pathway that most companies go through with the FDA. And it's basically just, hey, there's another market on the device. We're going to be kind of a me too. We're going to be just a slightly different version of their device. And so the regulatory pathway is a lot more simple. You basically just recreate and redo all of the testing that your predicate device did. And it's designed to be a much more swift process through the FDA. But kind of in the midst of our 510K review, they came back and said, we think you're more unique than your predicates, which honestly, there's not a device that, goes in the IV line and intentionally separates. But there are some devices that have, flow control components and things like that. So, I'd say it was not great news when we got the word that they were kicking us de novo, but there were a lot of benefits to it. Some benefits, some drawbacks. Main drawback being it just takes longer. And typically for de novo devices, they require a good amount of clinical trial data. So obviously having to do a clinical trial in the middle of a pandemic was incredibly difficult and time consuming. But I think the main part with the de novo pathway is you're really creating a new class of device, right? This class of device, this type of device does not exist. And so you get to create your own special controls is what they're called. So special controls are just specific types of testing that your type of device has to complete and pass for the FDA to give you clearance. So we put forth some very rigorous special controls that we passed. And so that's just going to make it harder for anyone that comes behind us. It's going to make it harder for them to get that clearance. But, devices that come after us, they will be able to 510K off of SafeBreak as their predicate, right? It's one of those things where, if we would have known that we were going to be kicked 510K, maybe would we have done things differently? Sure. But we're really happy with the indications for use that we got. The clinical trial data that the FDA requested ended up being phenomenal. So we're launching now with great clinical trial results. And so, it worked out how it's supposed to, I guess, at the end of the day. So, it's definitely a long process. And for anyone that's interested, the new class is now called force activated separation devices. So that's kind of the broad moniker that the FDA tagged. Our device still called SafeBreak Vascular, but that's the general class name.
And that wraps up our 2021 recap of the top 5 episodes from the Startup Junkies podcast this year. Thank you so much for listening, for checking in. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and check in with Startup Junkies podcast weekly. We've got some big news, big announcements, great guests coming in this new year, and we are absolutely excited to bring you Startup Junkies Podcast 2022. Have a good year.